The year is the 20th millennium BC. It is the end of the period called the Pleistocene. This period began somewhere 1,600,000 years ago and will last until around 10 BC. It is more precisely placed in the period called the last glacial maximum. That period began somewhere around 21,000 years before Christ and will last until the 16,000th year. The planet at that time was a strange and mostly inhospitable place. Temperatures were lower than today's average and up to 20 degrees Celsius. Tropical seas were 2 to 5 degrees colder, and the north of Europe and America was covered with ice sheets up to 4 kilometers thick. The world around 20,000 years before Christ was inhospitably cold, dry and windy, a planet with frequent storms and an atmosphere full of dust. Lower sea levels brought some land masses together and created large coastal plains. Tasmania, Australia and New Guinea are one. Borneo, Java and Thailand are together. They form a mountain range located within the largest rainforest in the world. The Sahara, Gobi and other sandy deserts have been significantly expanded. Britain is only a European peninsula. Her north is buried under the ice. Most of North America is suffocated by a vast dome of ice. The sea level then fell by about 100 meters compared to today's level. Asia and Alaska are connected by a land bridge. Life in such a world is difficult, Stephen Michael writes. Human communities were forced to leave many areas that they inhabited before the last glacial maximum to remain suitable for settlement, but are empty because colonization routes are blocked by dry desert or walls of ice. People survive wherever they can. They struggle with low temperatures and constant drought. The last glacial maximum was not the only ice age humans survived. An ice age is defined as a geological period during which thick pieces of ice covered large areas of land. There were several such eras in the history of our planet. The earliest known is that during the Cambrian period, which dates back to 570 million years ago. Our ancestors separated from apes in evolution some 6 or 7 million years ago. Since then, they had to survive a series of ice ages. What distinguishes the end of the Pleistocene and the last glacial maximum? The fact that global warming will occur after it, which will forever change man and his world. From the moment our distant ancestor separated from the apes, humans have lived in the same way for millions of years. They were hunter-gatherers. With the end of the last glacial maximum and the arrival of global warming, people will begin to change their way of life. These will be perhaps the most important revolutions in the history of the human race. Life in the cold environment of the last glacial maximum was not impossible. People retreated to less cold regions. Hunter-gatherers were skilled enough to provide themselves with warmer clothing, tents and other means of protection from the winter. The open steppes and tundra were good hunting grounds, where you could hunt large animals such as deer, horses, and wild cattle. Stephen Mithen, in the book After the Ice, describes how the place looked during the late glacial maximum. The place is located in today's Ukraine. 5 dwellings form a rough circle in the tundra. The dwellings face south away from the strong icy wind closer to the bend of the half-frozen river. The dwellings are like igloos, but they are built of mammoth bones and skin, not blocks of ice. Each dwelling has an imposing entrance consisting of 2 tusks, ranged to form an arch. Walls for vertical support have massive leg bones. Jaw bones are stacked between them, with the chin down to create a barrier that protects against cold and wind. Tusks are also used on the roof to secure the skins, and dried grasses that are laid over the framework of bones and branches from the roof. Smoke is gently coming out of one of the dwellings. The baby's cry pierces the thick skin of the second dwelling. Behind the settlement, sledges are pulled from the river, loaded with large bones, the faces of those who work. They are enveloped in clouds of hot breath. Behind their thick beards and long hair, they hide most of their skin. These people are wrapped in leather clothes. These are not draped skins, but skillfully sewn clothes. It is the middle of winter, and this village is located about 250 kilometers south of the glacier. Temperatures can drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius, and such weather must be endured for 9 months. The Europe of the late glacial maximum was not entirely hospitable to humans. The icy climate removed most of the forests from the face of the earth. This was a favorable circumstance for hunter-gatherers. The old forests were barely passable, and it was difficult to hunt in the open spaces. Of the last glacial maximum, large herds of animals roamed around. In the Oxford Illustrated History of Europe, edited by Barry Candle in the chapter Revolutions in the Upper Paleolithic, he writes, "The extremely rich and productive environment, tundra and steppes that spread over a large part of eastern, central, and western Europe, provided ideal conditions for numerous species of animals that lived in herds and were resistant to the cold, such as reindeer, wild horses, steppe bison, and for larger species like the mammoth and the woolly rhinoceros." It would be an exaggeration to imagine that the steppe and tundra landscapes of late glacial Europe were a kind of animal Serengeti. But it would not be a huge exaggeration. It is known that many of these species formed large wandering herds that sometimes consisted of several hundred or even thousands of animals, and that the herds followed more or less permanent migration routes between summer and winter grazing. There is no doubt that the communities that lived in Upper Paleolithic Europe were well aware of these migrations and often set up their own settlements along these migration routes. To intercept the movements of animal herds, the cold had other advantages. The bodies of killed large animals could be frozen and thus preserved for months. Frozen meat was thawed on the fire. But despite these conveniences, life in Europe and other cold parts of the world was difficult. Relief and change will come only at the end of the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years before Christ. Cold did not prevail everywhere. There was grassland in Tasmania, in East Africa. There were savannas full of animals. On the shores of the Mediterranean and along the Nile River, fish could be caught. Still, it was best to live in an area that the American Orientalist James Henry Brewster called the Fertile Crescent. That arc of fertile hills, river valleys, and lakes stretches across today's southeastern Turkey, Syria, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq. This is how Stephen Martin describes life in one of the settlements in that Fertile Crescent. Somewhere around the year 20,000 BC at that time, a settlement of hunter-gatherers flourished on the western shore of Lake Tiberias, also known as the Sea of Galilee. When archaeologists excavate it, they will name it Ohalo II and recognize it as one of the best preserved settlements of the last glacial maximum. Given that it is located far from ice sheets and tundra, an oak forest is not far away. The dwellings in that part are made of brushwood. People wear clothes made of leather and plant fibers. A new hut is being built. Young wood is driven into the ground and intertwined to make a dome. Piles of leafy branches and skins were prepared to make a roof out of them. Such work on dwellings requires much less effort the net required by dwellings in an area bound by ice. Life in Hala seems very tempting. It is in this fertile half-moon that a change will occur that will completely change people's lives. The change will occur with the end of the last glacial maximum. Global warming will bring a new climate. In that new climate, somewhere around 10,000 years before Christ, a revolution will take place that will change people forever.